pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome everyone to a regular session of City Council for Goldendale for September 3rd, 2019. The first thing we're going to need is to excuse two of our members, Shannon Middleton and Alberto Monteveros. So moved. Have to report to signers. It's been moved and seconded to excuse Shannon and Alberto for this particular meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We don't have a public hearing on the agenda. We need a motion to approve the agenda and the consent agenda.
So moved.
Been moved and seconded to approve the agenda and the consent agenda. Any discussion, any questions, any changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That's the best part tonight. Under presentations, we have Captain Wickersham and two of his colleagues locally, and I'm going to ask him to both introduce his colleagues and let us know what each person's duty is to some extent, just so people understand more about fish and wildlife. And they're going to talk to us about cougars and deer and whatever else they want to say.
All right.
Thank you, Captain. Thank you.
Good evening, Council. So this is my first ever opportunity to speak to a city council during the actual council meeting. So thank you for this opportunity and bringing me to Goldendale for this. My name is Jeff Wickersham. I'm the captain for Fish and Wildlife Police in Southwest Washington. That comprises Lewis, Cowlitz, Wahkiakum, Clark, Skamania, and Klickitat counties. So I live in Skamania County, but when I first came down here, I worked here as a sergeant in both Skamania and Klickitat, and got to know the chief here and lots of the other law enforcement officers and individuals in the community. The purpose for us coming in tonight was about 2 weeks ago, we had an incident here in town with a cougar that was eating a deer, and it caused a little bit of a public safety issue. And we had an opportunity to speak with Mayor Cannon about the issue, and there's a large deer population here. So tonight I've got our local wildlife biologist for our agency, Stephanie Berg, and then Todd Jacobson, our local conflict specialist. They're going to do most of the talking tonight about the deer issue and how that's probably bringing in some cougar and other issues into your community. And we wanted to talk with the City Council about how we can maybe work together to solve some of these issues and maybe provide some alternatives to a large deer population in an urban area that will help to reduce other public safety concerns. So, I just want to get up here and
Thank
a
you,
little bit. Thank you.
Council, do you mind if I stand over here by the computer and run the slideshow?
Yeah.
Okay. And it'll be up here on the screen or on the wall if everyone can see. Okay.
Tom, would you like the lights off?
Yeah, that would be great, or at least dimmed, possibly.
It's all or nothing.
Okay, that
Right,
works.
That's how we do things here.
Okay, great. Well, City Council, I don't know if you remember, but about a year or so ago, the mayor and the police chief asked me to come and talk about the deer issue on a more individual scale, and how this deer issue may apply to individual landowners and what those landowners may do to help alleviate conflicts with deer. After this most recent cougar sighting in town and the issue with the cougar killing a deer in town, we had this conversation, as Captain Wickersham mentioned, and this presentation I have today is more of a larger scale approach, and I'm going to present some alternatives, some options for the city to contemplate and potentially take to help maybe resolve some of the larger deer issues in town.
First off, who has deer in their backyard?
Front yard.
Okay, front yard, okay.
Side yard, right yard.
Would everybody agree there's a lot of deer in town?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, we're all on the same page. Okay.
So, just to start off, I want to give a little bit of background about the issue that we're talking about here tonight. As you all had just confirmed, there are several deer, or a large deer population in the, well, we'll refer to Goldendale as an urban area. It's not like a skyscrapers, but we'll refer to like high density housing as an urban area in this case. And so, around the country, these urban areas such as Goldendale, or really any other city in the United States where you have wildlife, these urban areas serve as refuges for deer from common mortality sources, and those mortality sources, for the most part, include predation from carnivores, hunting, and then poor nutrition as well. A lot of times deer will come into cities to browse on the vegetation when conditions are harsh outside. When it's wintertime, there's still some lush vegetation within inside city limits. So when you get these refuges, you get a relatively high density of these urban deer. And what we have in Goldendale as well, it's acting as a refuge essentially for deer. In Goldendale and in these urban areas where we have high deer densities, you tend to see increased deer-human conflicts. So we've had several calls of the deer stuck in a fence in Goldendale. Not so much lately, but we get complaints about garden damage to deer, maybe aggressive deer that are used to being fed, or deer that, during the breeding season, the males get a little aggressive. Potential for vehicle collisions as well when you have deer out and about crossing streets on a regular basis. In addition, when you have urban deer populations, you have an increased risk of disease spread among deer. You've got deer in a high density in close proximity to each other. They're not necessarily spread out all over the landscape like you might see them up in the Simcoe Mountains. And third, and this is kind of what ties us into the cougar issue the other day, is that you have an increased risk of attracting large carnivores into town. When things get rough, out in wildlife habitat for predators, when deer numbers are low, such as what we're seeing around here, there's a likely chance that you may have carnivores coming in they're basically following the deer. If the deer were elsewhere, they'd go for the deer, but they happen to be in town, and that's kind of what we saw the other day, where a cougar was likely passing through, had an opportunity for maybe a possum and a raccoon and a deer in an urban area. So you get these scenarios where you're likely drawing large carnivores into urban areas. Now, if the deer weren't here, there's not really any reason for a cougar to stop by in town. It's likely just going to keep passing through. But we've got the deer.
Could I jump in there, Todd? Real quick?
Sure.
Another issue with that is, like Todd said, the cougars are probably, and large carnivores, are following these deer into town as their food source. But once they get here, there are some other food sources. You've got house cats and other small mammals that are here, even raccoons, as we found last week or 2 weeks ago. And so once they're here, they may find another food source. The primary food source for cougar is deer. That's what they want. That doesn't mean they're not going to find something else to prey on at the same time. And so by doing what Todd's going to talk about here, we solve a couple different problems.
So just to kind of take a step back from what I mentioned earlier, these are instances from in and around Goldendale when you have deer in human contact in these urban areas. You've probably heard about this on the news. This was, I think, back in December. There was a deer that had a piece of rope tied around his leg, and we actually had to tranquilize him in Goldendale and take the rope off the deer's leg. We were getting several complaints about him. This is just outside of Goldendale where someone had hand-raised a deer and then put deer tags in with specific messages on them. This was not inside town, but kind of similar area where you got a high density just outside of town. We had to tranquilize this deer, remove the ear tags, and relocate the deer, unfortunately. But it would have been much better had this not happened in the first place. And then here's an example. This is from white salmon, a very similar scenario to Goldendale where you have urban deer. In this case, there was a cougar that was passing through, happened to kill a deer in someone's backyard. We tranquilized this deer and this cougar and relocated him elsewhere. So these are some handouts that I think I presented last time, and I can get these for you. They're readily available. It just goes to show that urban deer issues are not an uncommon thing. Basically, anywhere throughout the U.S., whether you're dealing with white-tailed deer, mule deer in the west, or black-tailed deer, the Mule Deer Working Group published this specific fact sheet on urban mule deer issues. And at the end of the presentation, if you would like a way to reference these or get them, I can do that for you. So tonight our objectives here are to present a suite of options to the Goldendale City Council to help address the urban deer population and associated conflicts. And remember, when I'm presenting these options, this is just something that we're giving to the council to contemplate. There may be other options that we haven't explored. Just some things to mull over, and they're not necessarily exclusive options either. As you'll see, there are a couple options that go really well together. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about the education and outreach component, how critical that is, and some different avenues that we can take to help with education and outreach regarding deer and carnivores. So there are a few obstacles when we're talking about things like a deer issue in town. Obviously, many residents are fond of deer in their backyard. Not everyone wants to see deer out of town. They like having wildlife in their backyard. There may be, there are some disagreements in Klickitat County and other counties as well surrounding cougar and bear population management. That's not really something we're going to touch on tonight. It's kind of a separate issue, but just be aware that everyone's talking about cougar and bear population numbers. Urban deer issues are widespread around the country, like I mentioned. I did a quick search, and there are basically name any city in the West, and their city council has addressed a deer issue of some sort. In particular, in Colorado and Utah, I found a lot of issues emerging there, and it made the news headlines. So, no matter what option we pick, we're not really going to be able to get rid of all deer in Goldendale. That's not really a feasible option, so just kind of keep that in mind. And so whatever option we present and whatever the city council wants to discuss, you have to really determine what success looks like in your part. What is a successful plan to deal with deer? Is it that complaints are low? Is it that you don't have any carnivores coming through, or a low number of carnivores? Is it that you have a certain target population you'd like to have? So that's, again, something for the city council to discuss, but just keep in mind you want to really have a goal and a way to measure that if you want to try to implement any sort of plan. Again, I'm going to harp on the public outreach is critical. No matter what you do, there's going to have to be pretty extensive public outreach, and the public outreach and whatever alternative or plan that city council takes, it will take a lot of time and effort to see something be successful, and a lot of repeated efforts. It's really difficult to just say one thing and have it stick with the public, so a lot of repetition, a lot of outreach. Just keep all those things in mind, and they're things that are not insurmountable obstacles, just things that you'll need to approach. Now, a little bit of background about the city of Goldendale and how that relates to what we're talking about today, and Chief or Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong on any of these things related to the city, but I want to talk about Goldendale City ordinances a little bit. There is an ordinance on not feeding deer currently in place. The Chief and I and Captain Wickersham discussed that quite a bit the other day. The city has an ordinance that prohibits the feeding of deer within the city limits. My understanding is that there's no prohibition exactly against hunting on private property within the city, but generally from a safety standpoint it's usually discouraged. There is no hunting allowed on public property within the city limits currently. State law also prohibits unsafe discharge of firearms, so that's always something to keep in mind. There's that state law that pertains to firearm discharge. In terms of property ownership, most of the private parcels, within the city limits are too small for safe and effective hunting or other lethal deer removal. And for the most part, some of the larger chunks of property in the city are owned by the public. There are a couple large private parcels, but for the most part, that's what we're looking at here. So I'm going to present, I think, 5 different options. Just again, things to mull over. Choose what you want. Pull things from different options. These are, again, things that we're not forcing any of it on you. We're just presenting it to the city council to take as they wish. So, option 1 is really kind of a status quo option where we're not changing deer management, we're not changing predator management, but really you are focusing really intensely on increased education and outreach. Really the status quo where we're not doing any additional outreach or not doing any deer management, it's not really working, and that's why we're here today, because we're seeing carnivores move into the city. So again, option 1 is kind of an increased education and outreach component. And that does not all lay on the city. We are more than happy to partner with the city on education and outreach. I'm working on arranging an educational talk in January with the library on cougars, so that's just one avenue, but working really closely with you guys, that's something we want to do and hope that the city is open to implementing. So I kind of go into the pros and cons of each option here. The pros, the benefits, is that there's not really any management intervention required. It may help facilitate a kind of living with wildlife mentality where folks in the city realize, hey, we live in great wildlife habitat. There's wildlife habitat that butts up to the city and even in the city. And so the education and outreach component may help facilitate that mentality where people are just used to living with wildlife. This, again, may reduce conflicts with deer and carnivores. I don't think I'd put it up here if it wasn't going to help. So, yeah. In terms of the cons, this still may lead to increased deer numbers inside the city and the potential for future conflicts. It's not a silver bullet, won't solve all the problems, but it may help. You may continue to see carnivores come into the city following deer. Again, the likelihood is less if there's an education component, but it's not necessarily going to solve that issue. And you just have to be cognizant that there will be an increased workload for a successful campaign. And that's something we're more than willing to do. Education and outreach is something we really harp on, but it will take time and effort. So a second option we want to throw out there for contemplation is a limited public hunting option. Again, there's probably not really much public hunting that goes on currently. So some background information on this, or a way to think of it, would be that public parcels within the city limits, and you might have participating private parcels inside the city that are large enough to facilitate some sort of limited public hunting. Due to concerns about firearms, probably the best option would be like an archery or crossbow weapon restriction, where it's got the projectile definitely has a limited distance, it's a lot safer in close quarters. In this option, you would probably operate within the legal seasons, weapons, and bag limits, so it's not like the department would have to create any special seasons or make any special rules. There are already, as you'll see in the next slide, there are several opportunities already available. So it would just be exploiting the opportunities and just applying them to property within the city. Now, obviously, if you said, hey, we're going to have public hunting in the city, you would probably get a lot of people who expressed interest. And so in this case, you would need some sort of a city-run access program where the city would decide who gets to hunt there. Now, for an example, down in Dillicorp Canyon on the Klickitat River, it's a privately owned piece of land, and they work with us on access. But during the general firearm season, that private ownership, they run their own drawing system, basically, where people apply. They run a random draw to select a handful of the number of interested people to hunt that on any given day. So just something to keep in mind on how something like this may work. So it's not a free-for-all where the city would get to regulate who could have access. So some of the benefits. There's extensive fall hunting opportunities, and this is a snapshot of when people could potentially hunt and with what groups and what age classes. There's some general seasons that are out there. So like archery only is open right now, September 1st through the 27th in this game management unit, basically from Goldendale to the Klickitat River. And hunters can either harvest a 3-point minimum buck or an antlerless deer. And you can find all of these things in the game regulation pamphlet, but that's an existing season that you could in theory apply to in town as well. So some of these are general season, and then if you kind of look in the middle there where it says special draw, we have special draw permits for hunters in this area as well, where it's a limited number. For example, October 12th to 22nd, it's an antlerless hunt for youth only, so we give 5 antlerless, so basically doe, female deer permits to youth hunters during that period that is in this area. So again, these are just options that are currently on the table, seasons that are already open for archery hunting. You would just need to take those and open it up in town in theory under this option. One of the benefits, again, is that this provides a public hunting opportunity to assist with the problem. The public really likes being involved in helping, especially when it comes to hunting. They're always asking us for more opportunity. They like being involved in trying to help solve issues. There's a potential youth hunting opportunity in this avenue, which is usually looks really good, and the community is generally fond of providing opportunity for youth hunters. This may reduce the number of deer and or provide pressure to move outside the deer to move outside the city. So, an archery hunter may not be successful, but the pressure on the property where someone's walking around trying to hunt a deer may move those deer outside of the city. And this has been successfully implemented around the United States. If this is an option you're interested in, I would recommend taking a look on the internet. There's a particular city now, it's in Utah, I don't remember the exact city, but they've implemented an urban archery program to help with their deer issues for years. They've had no complaints, no issues with the public at all. So if you want to go down this route, do some research. There's plenty of examples out there where this has been implemented. So a few of the downsides, just things to keep in mind. This doesn't provide year-round pressure. This is mostly geared during the hunting season in the fall. There could be possible opposition from citizens and potential public interference if there are folks who are opposed to this. There is a slight potential for injured deer who maybe get shot with a bow and arrow or crossbow to run onto neighboring parcels. Sometimes it takes a while for those animals to expire after being shot. They may move a little bit onto a neighboring parcel. And that's something to keep in mind and potentially work with neighboring landowners on in case this happens. In terms of the access, having hunters on public property, that would be something that the city would need to manage. It would take a little bit of the city's time and effort to facilitate that. And then this last point, it may create a sink phenomenon. So basically, the theory behind that is that if you have really good habitat and you take out all the deer, you may still just draw more deer in, if that makes sense. You're basically, that's like a sink. There's deer continuing to funnel. No guarantee that that would happen, but as long as there's good habitat and potentially some feeding or other issues that might go on, you may be continuing to draw deer into this area. And this is where that education component really comes in to help counteract that. A third option, and keep in mind some of these options aren't necessarily extremely feasible, but I'm presenting them so that the city council may have an opportunity to decide, you know what, we considered that, decided it's not an option. In some areas around the country, the federal USDA Wildlife Services branch will contract with a local government to do selective deer removal, and that would entail sharpshooting with suppressed firearms. I don't know that we've ever done this in Washington State, but in some areas in the East Coast, that's happened where urban deer problems are just out of control. One of the benefits is that this provides effective and immediate deer number reduction. It's usually they're pretty good at what they do in terms of taking out deer that may be causing problems. But on this, there are quite a few downsides to consider. One is cost. We were talking potentially tens of thousands of dollars to contract with Wildlife Services to do something like this. Again, you maybe have possible opposition from citizens, and maybe there may be some interference. It's not a long-term solution to come in and just take out a bunch of deer and spend a bunch of money at one time. There's likely going to be other instances where you have deer coming in, and so you may not want to contract with Wildlife Services every single year to remove deer. And again, kind of like the hunting, it may create a sink problem where you remove a bunch of deer, but they still funnel back in, and then perpetuating the cycle of having to contract with someone. And as I mentioned earlier, this isn't really part of WDFW's management approach. We generally try to use public hunting and education and outreach. We've never, to my knowledge, used a contract with Wildlife Services to remove deer from an area, just to keep in mind. A fourth option is a high-intensity harassment option. Now, I know individual landowners may harass deer from time to time by shooting with a garden hose, but this is a more focused, concerted effort to try to harass deer in the city so that they feel that this isn't a safe place, they feel not welcome, they're more likely to move outside the city. And so that may include harassment with pyrotechnics, rubber buckshot, something I use quite a bit to harass deer and elk, potentially paintball guns, water. If you can get a large group of people together who are interested in implementing this, if it's not just one or two people, if it's more wide scale, you may have more effect hazing deer out of the area. And so potentially you might have a coordinated citizen effort where you have a group of citizens who are designated to go and haze deer in these public places. Just an option. Not every landowner may have the ability to use a paintball gun to haze deer. So some of the benefits is that this is a non-lethal approach. It generally, the public is generally fond of non-lethal techniques in a lot of areas. It may provide a longer-term deer avoidance of the city solution. Deer may become used to it and they may decide that they want to come back if they get used to the stimulus and the hazing, but it's hard to know. And the harder you do it, the more effective it's going to be. Some of the downsides is that it's not likely to be effective without high participation. One guy can't just run around around the whole city hazing deer off. Again, it's going to take quite a bit of time and effort, and there's a potential for what I call deer pinball between properties, where you may haze deer off one property, but then they go on someone else's property where they don't want to haze, and you basically just bounce around deer like a pinball machine inside the city. So that can be a little exhausting and frustrating at times when they just bounce around. I know I've done that with elk quite a bit. A fifth option to consider is relocation and contraceptives. I kind of bundle these in as one because they're kind of along the same lines, which would either entail capturing deer, moving them outside of the city limits, or administering some sort of contraceptive, basically making it so that females are less likely to get pregnant. This generally looks good to the public, but there are a lot of downsides to it. And again, this is not part of WDFW's management approach. We don't really do this anywhere. There have been examples in like, I think Long Island or some places in high density areas on the East Coast where they've tried this, where public hunting and hunting in general is really not accepted. So they've really been out of options and they've tried contraceptives or relocation. It's very cost prohibitive. One example I looked at, it cost the city about $2,000 a deer to move them outside of the city. It doesn't necessarily solve the issue. Most mule deer around here are migratory to some extent, and they're highly mobile. So if you take a deer and move him up the Pipeline Road or her up the Pipeline Road, there's a good chance that deer is probably going to come back. And the contraceptives are very difficult to administer. It may prevent additional growth within the city, but it doesn't address the current numbers. So let's say if you have 50 deer in the city, you give them all contraceptives, you still have 50 deer in the city. It may wean down eventually in future generations, but yeah, it's a little difficult to do and very cost prohibitive. So those are kind of the 5 options we wanted to throw out there for y'all to consider, and like I said, take what you will, or you know, mull it over, and you don't have to implement any of them. Just something to give to you to think about. In terms of the education and outreach component, what that might look like a little bit more. There's several topics that really relate to this. Living with deer, and that's kind of the presentation that I gave a few months back. And that's more applicable to your general residents. Again, addressing residential deer issues with damage, issues with supplemental feeding. I know some people know it's illegal, but maybe they don't realize there are other downsides to that besides getting a ticket. Livestock husbandry, you don't have too many livestock animals inside Goldendale necessarily, but there are a lot of smaller operations on the periphery. And in similar scenarios, sometimes those livestock operations can bring large carnivores into town because, you know, a cougar doesn't really know a goat from a deer necessarily. And if you have livestock husbandry practices that aren't the best, you may be attracting those carnivores in. And then we have some general living in bear and cougar country information that we present on a regular basis, as well as recreating in bear and cougar country as well. Slightly different topics, but there are a lot of people that hike up towards the observatory, presenting information on how to behave when you're out in the wild, where you might encounter a bear, a cougar, or even a fox, as some of you experienced out by the observatory. Those are all topics that we can touch on that might help the deer issue and help people be aware of the large carnivores in the area. And in terms of avenues of getting these messages across, library seminars, as I mentioned, I gave a presentation this last winter as part of the library Simcoe Mountain series, planning on giving one again this winter as well. We have a lot of brochures and information that we distribute when possible, but sometimes it's hard to get those out to the general public on a wide-scale basis. Classroom talks, more than happy to come to the middle school, high school, elementary school to get some of the information out there and get kids involved in understanding that, hey, if you live in an area, it's pretty neat, great wildlife habitat, this is what you should do and how you should behave around wildlife, starting at a young age. Community projects. Now, I don't have any specific ones in mind, but potentially there's a community project to haze deer or some other education and outreach component where we can bring these topics to the community on a larger scale. And then, as I maybe suggested before, a community involvement. Perhaps the city creates a deer committee that meets on a regular basis to maybe tackle some different deer issues and figure out a way to get the education and outreach out to the community. And then obviously the city of Goldendale, perhaps the city council has ideas on how to spread information as well that we haven't touched on, but definitely would need your involvement and your buy-in on this as well. So in terms of next steps, where do we go from here? We've presented a list of some potential options. Like I said, not exhaustive, and they're not exclusive options either. Just want to give this to the city to mull over. I always really recommend reaching out to other local governments or areas, really anywhere especially in the western United States where you have both deer and carnivores present. Reach out to some of those communities and see how their local governments have handled those deer issues. Perhaps after this, the city council might want to have some public meetings where they get buy-in from the public and get their thoughts on how we might address the urban deer issue. And then lastly, I want to point out that Fish and Wildlife, the WDFW, is available as a resource or as a potential partner. More than willing to work with you guys in any way, shape, or form possible. So you just have to let us know. We're dedicated to working to conserving wildlife, working to alleviate conflict, providing hunting opportunities, and then obviously providing customer service as well. So we're here for you. Just let us know what you need and how you would like to work with us, if so, and yeah, we're here. I think that wraps everything up.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, hopefully, let us know if you have any questions.
You have comments or questions or suggestions for harassing deer?
I think those are some really interesting options.
Very good.
I'm particularly interested in option 2. My husband got me a crossbow for Christmas last year, and so, I think people would dig the public hunting option.
And I can send this to you all as well, so you have it as a reference. You should have printed off handouts. But yeah, you can all have it as a reference and bring it up later at additional meetings if you choose.
I'll have one boxes for next meeting.
Mayor, one question is that then you do the bull hunting, then who would be responsible for the carcass then? The person that does the bull hunting?
Correct. So with general hunting, hunter harvests an animal. It's actually illegal to waste the carcass, so they would have to take the carcass and dispose of it all.
Right.
You could implement certain rules where they couldn't leave like the internal gut contents there. If you harvest an animal, you have to take it all with you. In some of our areas where we have damage to agricultural crops, like let's say you have an elk damage to a farmer's crop field, we have those same type of rules where we say you can go hunt there, but you've got to take it all out with you, just to not damage the field.
Yeah.
So.
A number of years ago, when you talk about doe season, now is that so many permits? It seemed like the state it was open, or I could be wrong. This is years ago, but it was open doe season, or maybe you had to get a special license, but it wasn't limited to how many licenses were given out.
Right, so historically, years ago, particularly in the 80s, 90s, even to the early 2000s, Klickitat County had a lot of deer. And we had ample amounts of antlerless doe hunting opportunities as more of a population reduction tool. We usually give antlerless opportunities when we want to reduce the overall number of deer. Things have changed. We've had some bad winters. We've had some disease outbreaks. The habitat has changed in the deer summer range, and so for the most part, our deer numbers are quite a bit lower than they have been historically, and so we really weaned off those antlerless doe tags. And in terms of antlerless doe opportunities, we have that early archery season where a general hunter can shoot a 3-point buck or an antlerless deer, and then we have a handful. I think there's 5 youth tags for antlerless doe. So historically, we're talking about hundreds to potentially, close to 1,000. Now we're down to about 5, just because the deer dynamics have changed so much in the last several decades.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
And that may change if the deer population fluctuates, but Stephanie and I and our other staff in the area work closely to assess the deer population, decide what type of hunting pressure is needed. We take damage complaints from farmers into account when we make that decision as well.
Okay.
How do you measure how large the population is?
That's a great question. Did you want to interject in the previous? Stephanie, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, so,
Stephanie, could you stand up?
You want her over here or over here?
She's
That's
perfect
fine.
there.
yeah, so, just like most species of wildlife, there's different surveys that we're gonna do to assess the population. Specifically for these mule deer out here, we're using a fairly new method of looking at the population, and from that we're getting a population estimate, and we're also getting different ratios. So ratios that we're interested are how many bucks for 100 does, how many fawns for 100 does, and that sort of information is going to tell us how the hunting season has gone, how much pressure they experience during the hunting season in terms of bucks to does, and then also how the winter has gone. So if we're looking at a ratio of fawns to does, we're looking at that before and after the winter and seeing basically how many fawns die during the winter. And so this newer population assessment that we've been able to do, getting abundance, we've done that since 2016, And we've seen a decrease in the deer population in Klickitat County every year. And we've also seen from, you all experienced it, the winter of 2016-17, a very large decrease in the number of deer and a high winter fawn and also adult mortality that winter. Following that winter, in summer of 2017, we had a disease outbreak. I think many of you heard about that, adenovirus, and that happened more to the east of Goldendale, but in an area that has a lot of small acreages where people were feeding deer and providing water, so the deer were concentrated, and we lost a lot of deer through that too. So the deer populations are down right now. So that's why you see in that list of hunting opportunities that there's not a lot of opportunity to take a doe. And that's because the population overall in the county is down. You know, historically, yes, there were a lot more opportunities to take doe, and we had damage complaints. Now we have 0 damage complaints, and really the only place that I guess we're experiencing complaints from is from Goldendale. So, yeah.
What's the lifespan of a deer?
Well, they can live a long time. I mean, they've seen in the wild maybe 19, 20-year-old deer, but that's not typical at all. Yeah. Usually if they make it past their first year, you know, that's the hardest time. They can live maybe to 10.
I noticed this year that bucks and does, for the most part, look incredibly healthy. They're a good coat, they seem to be very good size. But what about those that are really sickly, very, very thin, and just kind of slumming around? Are those dangerous for somebody if they kill something like that? Is that something that's edible or get rid of?
No, I mean, you wouldn't assume that a deer has a disease, and most diseases they have aren't communicable to humans through the meat, especially if you cook the meat properly. But it's a really hard life being a deer. And so you're gonna see a lot of them that are, that don't look good. That's just normal, you know, just the range of the population. Yeah.
That's what we want, those that don't feel so good and go away.
And particularly, deer are in their poorest body condition at the tail end of winter, where they've exhausted all of their reserves, are more susceptible to issues and disease. And so in a public hunting standpoint, hunting season is generally in the early to mid-fall when they're usually in their peak condition. So that's not something that we see a whole lot of during a hunting season.
Do you have an idea of just like what a guesstimate of the population of deer might be in the Goldendale area?
No, so the population estimates we get are by the game management unit level at the smallest, but even that's kind of a small area. It would be very difficult to estimate the number of deer in Goldendale. Basically, you know, the method that we use, we're actually flying and doing these surveys aerially, and we actually try to stay away from cities because people don't like helicopters flying around, and that can disturb their horses and things like that. So, yeah, it's a difficult thing to do. You know, to go that small is really difficult with an animal like deer that are moving large distances, and then also within a city. Yeah, it would be really hard.
So I should just count the number that I see in my yard on any given day and, like, you know, try to extrapolate that based on.
Yeah, you could, if their home range is your yard only.
Yeah, I mean.
So have you looked at using drones much?
Yeah, so
Seems like you could
recently,
get
within the past few years, the governor has worked with different agencies, state agencies who have wanted to use drones for their work. And we're really just getting started on that in our agency. Drones are really expensive, and you have to have someone to operate them. So it's not just like anyone can fly their drone around. But yeah, it's definitely an emerging technology, and we'll see in 5 to 10 years if we're doing deer surveys by drone. I mean, no one is doing that yet, but definitely I would see it in the future, yeah.
To elaborate on your question earlier, talking about like a local abundance, there's not necessarily a way that like maybe the city council could get a statistically sound estimate of a deer population in the city, but you could, when you're talking about measuring success, if you did a repeated some sort of survey, had a group of people surveying and isolating different areas so you're not double counting deer, if you did a survey like that repeatedly over time and kind of monitored it over multiple years, that may help you get an estimate of what's happening to the deer numbers, keeping in mind that deer are migratory, so in certain times of the year you may have very low deer, you may have very high deer later, but if you had a repeated survey like that, they may give you some sort of a rough idea of what the deer population is doing.
Right. Well, I mean, in your presentation, you talked about how we're going to measure success, right? And so I'm thinking, well, establishing a baseline would be a good place to start. I think, yeah, that could be a good idea, just having people observe different areas and try to, see if anything that we might do
Yeah,
be working.
I mean, you could potentially create a little protocol, basically, that people follow for surveying. That's what we do for a lot of our surveys, is we have a specific protocol that we follow that we repeat every year.
And to speak to how bad this issue can get out of control in certain areas, on the East Coast they have whitetail. We have mule deer here, so they're kind of different. But whitetail deer will go after grain crops, and they're highly successful at reproduction. Their numbers start increasing exponentially. Those states have, a couple of the states, I believe New York and Pennsylvania, do not have limits on the number of deer tags they will issue a hunter. They can just keep going out and getting deer tags over and over and fill as many as they can because they become such a nuisance species. And in fact, the problem is so bad, it's actually the #1 cause of vehicle accidents on New York roads. More than all other types of traffic accidents, they have even worse weather than we do. And that's what's causing a lot of their problems. So they've instituted campaigns there to reduce their deer population for public safety reasons.
Sure.
So we're talking about maybe we want to reduce carnivores coming into town, stop them from causing private property damage to people's gardens and roses and stuff like that. But there's actually measurable public safety issues that they want to decrease because it's causing a problem. I would actually say a public safety issue here in Goldendale, I've responded to a lot of closed season at night hunting that occurs on deer here in town. There's some pretty nice trophy bucks that are here in town that people would like from time to time. And we've had issues where people have come out during closed season and they've trespassed on the private property to get at those animals. We experience those issues elsewhere in the county and elsewhere in the state, but it's such a concentrated population. I mean, there's people brazen enough to be slinging arrows past people's homes in the middle of the night, and the landowner will come out the next morning and here's the dead deer that was in their yard the night before. It's got an arrow in it. And either the people got spooked and they didn't want to come grab it. Those are issues that we can also try to minimize by providing a legitimate opportunity for somebody to harvest that. So instead of having to sneak around at night, they could go out in broad daylight in a safe area and get that and not be breaking the law, minimize a problem, and get something to put in their freezer. And the entire town wins. But it's not just that, there's multiple options that need to be considered so that we can be successful at trying to solve this problem in a way that makes sense to this community. So like Todd talked about, there's a lot of different options. Not one of those is going to fix the problem. It's going to have to be a combination of a couple different things. And it's really going to be sustained pressure on all of them over a few years before we really might be able to measure success on that. Because we could have a harsh winter that comes through and it knocks them all down, it seems great, and all of a sudden things get better and they're right back where they were. So it's things to consider.
It's going to really take an organized community effort to do something effective.
Correct.
If you'd asked me if we wanted to put a plan together, how many if we went ahead and went for does, how many does do you think we would have to take out to manage it to keep the cougars away from Goldendale? Are we talking 20? Are we talking 10? And it would have to be at 2 different times of the year to keep enough pressure on. I mean, what would be the minimum?
Well, so I don't think any of us could answer that one, but I think what it comes down to is, as we create a disincentive for deer to be here through whatever pressure that might be, whether it's hazing and hunting in combination with one another, along with possibly better public outreach about the downsides of feeding wildlife here in the city, we reduce those animals from coming in, we provide some pressure to keep them out. I mean, right off the bat, 5 deer not in town is 5 deer that are not eating people's yards and causing other problems. It could be attracting other predators into town. I mean, so it could be, that's a start. I don't think we can really put a number on it. It's just, it will sort of happen over time. And I know that's hard where you want a measurable, where you want to be able to say, okay, we want to apply this technical fix. We know that the number is going to be 10, so we need to get 10 right now, and that's going to solve our problem. I just don't think we can. I don't think we can adequately say that that's going to do
black
it.
and white guy.
Okay, then it's 7.5.
So
Decide where that half comes from.
I would say though, the more people you can educate and present material on living with wildlife, the more successful you're going to be in terms of numbers. If you want a number, I would say, how can you reach out to 100% of your citizens and give them this information?
I think we put a program together, we would do a little bit of everything that you kind of said. You know, definitely the education, enforcing, don't be feeding. You know, let's try to solve some of those issues. But then again, you know, what else can we do to try to solve this? And I do think, you know, the paintball. I guess I worry about people going around with paintball guns and stuff in town and shooting. I worry about firearms in town, obviously. I mean, there's a safe way of doing things. You know, we do have some property that's city-owned. I think that we could do some harvesting of some of them safely. So I think there's a program that we could put together that could kind of incorporate everything and keep the citizens, you know, understanding of what we're trying to do and being patient with us trying to address this problem. So I think there's a lot of things that we could do. I think you covered a lot of it, and I appreciate it.
So Mayor, it almost sounds like you need to form a committee, as I suggested in the PowerPoint, to form up ideas, collect the information, and do a further suggestion to the city council.
Exactly, I'm happy to do that. But we'll be collecting this background information to make sure we're headed the right way as much as we can.
So can I make a motion there too, to form the deer committee?
You know, I think, I mean, you either do that or a deer and cougar committee.
Wildlife committee.
Yeah, urban wildlife.
There you go.
And
How's that?
just want to point out that, you know, we could have similar issues with raccoons. I mean, this cougar the other day, we identified that it had killed a raccoon in town as well. So when you have small wildlife, it's still, you know, potentially an attractant. So let's keep that in
So we
mind.
have a motion on that to create the wildlife committee. Is there a second?
It's been moved and seconded for Goldendale, City of Goldendale to have a committee formed for wildlife, for addressing the issues of wildlife in the city. Any opposed or any comments or questions?
A quick comment.
Well, my comments, who would be on that committee? Would it be more than just city council members?
The 3 city council and then select board will also
Yeah,
apply.
okay.
Just like all our other committees.
Like the airport committee and others.
Yeah, okay, I like that.
That'd be a short-term, you know,
Right.
address the problems, get it going.
It's probably going to be a never-ending problem, so
It could be,
get ready.
it could become a permanent
Unless
committee.
we get some of the deer contraceptives, which is crazy. Who would have thought that they had such a thing? That sounds insane.
Let's take a vote. All in favor of forming a wildlife
Aye.
committee?
Yeah.
Any opposed? Okay, good. We'll do it.
I'll volunteer.
We'll
I'm
be
also
talking to
volunteer.
city.
I think I had a comment.
Yes.
Did somebody, I think that one of you had a comment.
Let's
Oh,
start.
there, okay.
You already answered it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll put that together and advertise it and get technical material out that will actually help the committee. And if we can get a fairly good-sized committee, we can do a lot better on spreading information through the community as well. I think I still have a supply of the cougar brochures you sent us the last time.
Okay.
And we put them out at City Hall, and I'll do it again, and if I'm short of them, I'll give you a call.
And we've got more here,
Oh,
cougar
okay.
and bear. So
Good. Yeah.
feel free to take whatever you
Yeah,
need.
cougar and bear is a good idea.
So I have a question about the cougar issue we had was last week or before. Just because I saw a whole bunch of stuff on our Facebook and, you know, you had each side of it, how some people were for and against killing the cougar. what was the reasoning why it wasn't just relocated? Is that a good or bad thing to do? Or what was the?
So the sheriff's office, as I'm sure you're aware, has instituted a dangerous wildlife program utilizing members of the sheriff's department as well as some houndsmen from within and outside the community, as well as posse members. I was the only one in service that day, and so I was en route, and the sheriff instituted the policy or the program at that point. And based on where the cougar was and what was going on, it was decided it would be euthanized. So that decision was made long before I got there. But we had discussed it on the phone, and I agreed with that at the time as well. Not every situation ends like that. Supervising the Vancouver area, we've had cougars in trees in very highly rural or urban areas, like right off I-205 at Mill Plain, north of the airport there. So, it's like a house every 500 square feet or something,
Yeah.
And we had a cougar in a tree, and the entire SWAT team responded to that. And we ended up sedating that animal with tranquilizers and immobilizing it and moving it off scene, because that was an example of where a cougar had come into an urban area at night. It hadn't caused any problems. We were going to give that cougar another opportunity and get it way out in the middle of nowhere. Ear tagged it, and we never saw it again. And so there's opportunities for that type of relocation at times, but it has to meet the right criteria. And for us, when we've had a depredation on farm animals, or we've got something that's just come into the city and it's remaining there for a long time, and despite our best efforts, it's just not moving on, we'll often change the way that we're addressing the situation. We may still immobilize it, and it might be euthanized at a later time. It just really, every situation is different, and we don't have a policy that says, unless it's killed an animal or it's attacked a human, we don't have a hard set policy that says we will do this in every situation. There's a couple that we know what we need to do, but then the rest of it, it's a situation by situation basis. So, and we, as Fish and Wildlife, we have most of our officers, as well as our biologists, conflict staff, have mobilization equipment that's issued, and we have the FDA listed drugs and things that are needed to do that type of operation. But it takes a few people to get there and make sure all the safeties are in place to make something like that happen, because we don't want to be flinging mobilization drugs someplace and have it wind up in somebody's house or somewhere. So we still take the same precautions with using those types of tools as we would with a firearm.
Right.
So we want to make sure it's safe before we do anything.
Well, when we get this committee put together, we'll have at least a contact point, if not a representative on that committee from Fish and Wildlife as an advisor. I think that would be very helpful. And
Great.
Todd has done an awful lot to help us already, so it'll probably be Todd or somebody he wants to have there. And we'll probably also have Reggie or somebody that's around the town on a much more extensive basis, like a police officer or even our fireman might want to be part of this committee. Because it'll take a pretty good size of effort to come to decisions as well as particularly to come to actions. But we really appreciate all that you've given us, information, the advice, the direction was terrific. We appreciate it very much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, council members.
The next item on the agenda are the department reports. We'll begin with Reggie, our police chief.
First, I'd like to thank Fish and Wildlife for coming tonight.
Thanks, Michelle.
I think we have a great relationship with Fish and Wildlife, and especially their local officers that they have around here. They always respond. They actually even responded today and helped us out today. So we have a great working relationship with them, and really appreciate them coming today and giving us some options. We had our first day of school today, and buses were out, and the school zone beacons were all working. We were able to have officers in the school zones, and everything went extremely well for the first day. We did have a couple calls around the schools, but nothing that was alarming, and so I think we had a successful first day, so we can't wait for day number 2 tomorrow. For the police department, we're still rising in calls. Right now, we're 421 calls up from last year, so we're still seeing an increase, and again, a lot of these are just people calling in suspicious type of calls. but again, we're still seeing a rise in our caseload. We did have another cougar sighting today, and I was able to just talk with Fish and Wildlife about it, and we went ahead and called them, and they came out, and we had officers respond to it, and we're in the area looking, and it was at the corner of, let's see if I have it in here, Collins and Clickitat, and it looked like it left town, and it was about 6 o'clock, 6:30 this morning. I don't know the exact time, I didn't actually write that down, and they went ahead and came out, and also looked around, and we didn't see anything. So we're continuing to just tell everybody, if you see any sightings or anything, just give us a call, and we'll continue to team with Fish and Wildlife and assess the situation on a case-by-case basis. So, and that's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Reggie, thanks a lot. Noah, Fire Department.
So after, what was it, last week we had some rainfall, we've had some rainfall quite a bit this summer. I got a couple phone calls at the fire department asking if they can burn. I'm just reminding everybody the burn ban is still in effect. It is still dry out there, even though we do get this rain, so just be mindful of that. And also with the phone calls and stuff, the fire department was flooded out in the big monsoon that we had. And our phones are, we can get our messages and stuff, but it's been taking us a couple days to get back, so if you call us, please be patient with us.
Thank you, thank you. Connie, anything on your department?
No.
Okay. We don't have items of council business or resolutions or ordinances at this point. We'll go to report of officers and the city administrator. We'll begin with Larry Bellamy, then the city council, and then the mayor.
Okay. The paving of South Columbus was finished last Tuesday, I think it was, the 28th, I guess it must have been Wednesday. So the paving work is complete. That's the piece from Golden Ridge Drive to South City Limits on North Columbus. And so now the engineer is working on the closeout documentation, and we'll process all the payments and requirements for the contract, the contract work that was done. So we've got a little bit of work to do on that to finish up the admin work, but we're confident that we got a good job, and we should be able to move on from there. Little story about small town airports. The Department of Transportation Aviation Division put into place a passport type program where you go to each small community airport and get a small stamp in your passport book. And so and then the other thing that's happened is we've instituted a situation where we have a courtesy car out at the airport. We use the old admin car that we were going to get nothing for. We decided to go ahead and put that car up at the airport, right near where the pilot's lounge is. If you've ever been up there, it's not really used as a pilot's lounge because it's all locked up and it's deteriorating. But we might fix it up one of these days.
Right.
That is one of our ideas, is to try to fix that up. But the car's parked up there. We have one of those lock boxes for which you need to know the combination. And inside the lock box is a set of keys that you can use to get in the car and start the car and drive it to wherever. So today, we had a couple who was in their 80s that wanted to fly to Goldendale because Goldendale was the only stamp they hadn't collected in the southwest region where they reside. And so they came to Goldendale, picked up the courtesy car, came to City Hall, got the stamp, went out for breakfast, and got back, took the courtesy car back to the airport, and away we go. See, it works.
It's working.
And it brings people to our community. So, anyways, it's a little fun story, but it was just something that Department of Transportation and Goldendale partnered to do, and it was pretty cool.
Very good.
So we got to meet some new people and inquire about their story.
So does that mean we can use lodging taxes for the airport?
I'll think about that.
Okay.
Okay, we have several upcoming meetings, so I wanted to make sure that we get those on your agenda. Next Monday, we're going to have an ordinance committee. I think we talked about that at the
Yeah.
last council meeting. We do have some things that we would like to introduce for discussions at the ordinance committee level. So that will be on the 9th at 7 o'clock in the evening here at the city council chambers. And then the next Monday, of course, we have the regular council meeting. The Monday following that, which would be the 23rd of September, we'll have the presentation of the draft final report for the broadband survey work that was done. And we will advertise that as a special meeting. So actually, any council member that wants to come to that can. We don't have to worry about there being more than 4 or more than 3, and so everybody can come if they want. And this will be pretty much the final presentation of that work that's been done by our consulting company.
Is that at 7?
That's at 7 as well. And then since there's 5 Mondays in September, we thought we'd go ahead and use that last Monday, which would be the 30th of September, to have a budget meeting. To go over our budget numbers. And the purpose of that meeting would be to propose numbers that would be included in the proposed preliminary budget, which is due October, first meeting in October. So that would give us a chance to go through some things that we need to discuss at a council level, and that's all I have for tonight.
7 p.m. on that budget.
That's at 7 o'clock.
I thought it would be, thank you.
So Larry, on the ordinance committee, are you gonna have handouts or anything like that?
We will try to have some. One of the things we want to discuss is some of the parking code issues.
Would it be possible to send those out in advance
Yes.
so we can do what we had?
Sure.
Save us a little time.
You bet. So Reggie, we need to come up with whatever we're gonna
I'll work on it tomorrow.
do probably by Thursday at noon. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Larry. Appreciate it very much. Listen to our city council reports, and we'll begin with Mylan Walling.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I want to mention that the PUD invited the governor to come down to Clickett County to see the renewable natural gas plant. The PUD asked me that I would help them out, and for the last 6 months or so, I've been working on it. So about a week or so ago, we got confirmation that the governor is coming down. He will be coming from the airport straight to the renewable natural gas plant in Roosevelt. And then they have a ribbon cutting ceremony and a tour. After he leaves, then he'll be coming back to the airport, but then on the way back, then he will stop at the pump storage site. And there will be more of be able to see the site and more of a update briefing on the pump storage. And then back to the airport. Now also, then KVH has invited Mrs. Inslee to visit the Goldendale Hospital. And KVH is starting a new program, and it's the first one in the state. And Mrs. Inslee is very interested in this new program. And it's called the Upstream, it's a birth control program. That's about all the details I know about it, but I know the governor's wife, Mrs. Inslee, is very interested in it. So working with the KVH, I mentioned to it that perhaps they could both come down at the same time. They could both fly into the airport. And so they like the idea, the governor's office likes the idea, but we haven't got that confirmed yet. So we're waiting to see if that's confirmed, then we'll go from there. But anyway, I will keep in touch with you, Nancy, and also Roger on this. You know, soon you may hear from the PUD and the hospital, but then I'll make a follow-up, make sure that you hear about that. So anyway, that's what I have to report today.
Thanks, Mylan. It's interesting. Andy?
I just want to thank the Department of Fish and Wildlife, we talk, for coming here tonight, and thank Reggie and everyone else that was involved with taking care of the cougar that was in town. Also, Noah, you mentioned the fire department had the little bit of flooding down there. Has that, any of that been fixed yet, or what's going on with that?
It's not been fixed, but it is going through insurance, and we're waiting on word.
Okay.
That's all I got. Thank you. Guy?
Any word on Sogo?
We had a meeting with
Fantastic.
Gene Callan.
Right.
So they're working on a presentation and they're trying to work on a plan to see that building removed and start something new. It's gonna take a little bit of money outlay, and so they're trying to work out ways to do that. Kind of got a little break in the action with their vineyard project, and so, spend a little time on trying to make a plan for that area.
And Guy, one of the steps will be to clear away those shrubs and things around the building that don't have any particular use for landscaping. But the other things will be taken care of.
But they might upset the cougars in the area. So, airport, anything new on that?
No, not since our last meeting.
Okay. And it was really interesting. I got to talk to two of the officers involved with the cougar incident, and was vividly described the hunt and how stealthy that cougar was. They 1 second was there, and the next second was gone, and how inadequate the AR-15s were. And if you want, I can bring down some of my shotguns to give you an example of something that could fit inside the patrol vehicles.
They've given me a wish list of
Okay.
things they want their patrol car to be better prepared.
They're prepared.
So I'm looking at each and every option that they've
But I do have
put on
some,
my desk.
I could bring some examples down,
Okay.
so if you like.
Yes.
And then, last but not least, on the 23rd of August, a very good friend of mine, he's going to get and talk to you later, had a heart attack right in front of me. And it was pretty stressful, but EMS did a fantastic job. Before he was even in the ambulance, they had life flight flying in, which I was really impressed with. They looked at his EKG and realized that, hey, this guy's got a problem. And I mean, with his heart, besides the other stuff. But needless to say, they did a fantastic job. There was an off-duty, the fire department showed up, two of the gentlemen from that, and I was truly impressed with the response they did. And I'd just like to commend them for it, and I believe my good buddy is going to get up and talk about it here during the public comment. So give my thanks to the fire department, the police department, and EMS too. It's definitely well worth the bond we're paying for them. So, and I was told there was 4 other responses going on at the same time, so they were real busy. So, and that's all I have.
Shane?
Yeah, I don't have a lot tonight, other than that was a great presentation from Fish and Wildlife. I'm really excited about the formation of the Wildlife Committee. I think that will definitely be something meaningful for council members and community members to participate in. As much as I enjoy watching the deer roam through my yard, they are kind of a pestilence in our community to some level. And bringing big cats in is not amazing. Other than that, happy school year to everyone. I know Goldendale started today. I get to start tomorrow, so 'tis the season. Watch out for kids and drive safely. And if you're a parent or a teacher or a grandparent, cheers. It's a good time to be back in school.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a great presentation. I had no idea that we had so many options for dealing with the population that we have. And I think there's some economic opportunities here. I mean, there's some opportunity for the city to generate some revenue from licensing and enforcement. And then also, I mean, people that are selling bows and maybe like freezers and things like that. So, and then there's an education component and a recreational component that I think would benefit the community as well. So, if we go with that limited hunting option, which I think makes the most sense. Also, kudos, Mylan, that what you said, that took a lot of hard work. I know that stuff is tough, and I think that if we can get the governor to look at that pump storage, that could really help make that thing happen.
That's the plans, right,
Yeah.
yeah, I know, it's been 6 months or more
Yeah.
working on this, yes.
Yeah, I remember seeing you in Olympia in like March or something.
Right.
When I went up for a hill climb with the Brewers Guild and you were working on that and,
That was-
yeah, so, yeah, good job.
Thank you.
And then Larry, I want to revisit the parks plan that we had started on and kind of got sidetracked when Carl departed. And
Okay.
is that something we need to solidify, that, the public works?
Well, it's really not something that we need to do, but if you're going out to get funding of any kind, you do need to have that in place.
Yeah, right.
And then furthermore, it certainly is something that we as a city need to pay attention to. What is our park system? Where do we see, what is the state of it right now? Where do we want to see it go? How much funding does it need to go to these different options? But we do need to address the parks in a more overall setting and try to give us an idea of what to do next and prioritize certain things and then determine if there's any funding that's available to
Right.
help make that happen. So that's not on my list of committees, but we can certainly do that.
Maybe before the next meeting? I'm not on that committee, I just sort of got involved, but we haven't met in a while.
Well, I think that before the next council meeting might be a little quick,
Okay.
because there are a lot of people that are interested in what goes on with the parks. The farmers market has an interest.
Right.
You have a recreational component that's interested. You have tourism activities that are interested in making a pitch for why we should improve the parks and things like that. And then there's also maintenance issues and just generally what kind of improvements we want to see down there.
Maybe October?
I think we could do it in October.
Okay. We'll keep everyone posted.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Thanks, Justin. On the mayor's side, in talking about the wildlife committee, that starts a lot of wheels turning in my head as far as the team that we'll build out of this. I don't really care too much for a committee approach as much as a team approach. And we'll have, I know, somebody from the police department and the sheriff's department and from wildlife advising or following what we do in that committee. And if you could let me know who is interested. Not everybody's a hunter, but you may have an interest in doing this. We can only have 3, and I want to make sure Shannon and Phil also have a chance to see if they want to be. But we'll work it out. We should have it formulated and out to you before the next council meeting. That's all I have. Let's go now to public comment. There's a 3-minute limit on this, but anyone here for public comment?
Mary Lou's 108 North Chatfield. I'm the one that guy was talking about that had a heart attack in his front driveway, working on the Goldendale Camaro. So it's getting put back together. I'd just like to say, every week we sit here and we listen to the fire department, we listen to the Goldendale Police Department and all the trainings and stuff they go through. And they both had people there representing with the ambulance crew. So they didn't have to be there.
But they were there.
But they were there. And it wasn't one person who made the difference. It was the work I got from everyone. From Guy making the phone call, to the police officers being there with the aid cars and everything from the fire department, to the police officer driving down Broadway, Byers Street, that I couldn't tell I was on Byers because I swear they didn't hit a chuck hole. But both paramedics needed to be working on it at the same time. It may sound kind of funny, but the airport committee needs to be involved because at the time, our normal airport our life flight comes out of Dallasport, and it was already en route to Hood or to Portland with another victim of a heart problem. So I had to wait for a 40-minute flight and response time for somebody to get one out of Pendleton was the closest one, and then it's a 13-minute flight to Yakima. Yakima couldn't even supply one. So getting Lifeline in the community, I think, is going to save somebody's life.
It's a very efficient, worthwhile.
But I cannot complain about anybody from the time they started working on me till I was over in Yakima at the hospital. I landed at the helipad. There was 20 people around me. They couldn't even get close enough to the gurney to deal with me. But I had spent 53 minutes of that golden hour just in getting to the hospital. Within 5 minutes of me being on the ground over there, I was actually in the OR room and getting 3 stents put in my heart. And most people that know me can't imagine that I was 88% plugged in all 3 to do that. But it has slowed me down.
Slow's okay.
Slow's okay, and actually today, guy took me back over there to the cardiology, and they gave me a clean bill of health for what I should be at this point in time to get things done. I can drive again, that kind of thing, so I'd really like to thank you guys and thank your crew. Along with the ambulance, I saw them on Tuesday when I got home, and they were absolutely amazed. I was out of the hospital and walking around from what they thought they had saw when they sent me over that way. The pilot in the Lifeline refused to let me fly over there. He said he thought the FAA would probably get a little upset if I was flying during the heart attack, even though I know how to fly it. Wouldn't stop the bar either, so. But I really had good care. Thank you all for your trainings and your well wishes.
We're happy to hear the good results, and I especially appreciate Guy Terrio. Guy, anyway, I'll get it in a minute. Guy kept me informed. I don't know that you were even in the plane yet when he was letting me know what had happened, and then he filled me in step by step.
He just didn't want me dying in this parking lot.
That's about it. I had to bring you Reggie.
Anyone else for public comment? Asa?
Yes. Asa Israel, 520 West Allen Street. First of all, Terry, I'm glad you're still with us. Sounds like you went through.
So mine.
Yes, I met you. #1 advocate. So I'm here tonight to kind of just talk about what I spoke about last time. And unfortunately, I was on basically hanging on every word of the night until you started talking about the park committee, and I pretty much missed what you and Justin corresponded about briefly. So, curious, I heard the word park.
Parks plan will be discussed, and we didn't talk about a date, but we can set it for October 13th. So tentatively, we were going to set it for October 13th.
Excellent, okay.
Wait, that's just 13th? Monday, the 14th?
Monday the 14th.
Yeah, okay.
So, as I spoke about previously, I'm here to basically advocate for the Oconee Park structures. Primarily, I came down here to advocate for the farmers market assets as they materialize as one of the structures. But I also briefly touched on the gazebo, which I had heard a rumor about the possibility of being demolished. So this is a rumor and it hasn't been corroborated by anybody, but the reason I bring it up again is because there's an old saying that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And we're hoping that the grease will come in the form of advocacy and coordination between the city's parks and public works department and basically all the citizens who have a vested interest in preserving our assets and hopefully finding a way to be fiscally responsible and efficient with our time and money while avoiding what I would consider to be a fiscally irresponsible move of demolishing these buildings, because most of you know it's harder to build a building from scratch than to repair one. But all that being said, I just kind of wanted to come back and refresh everybody's memory about it, and hope that, I'd like to go down and speak to Public Works at some point, but I don't have a lot of free time. I'm working down in Dallasport during the week, so pretty much coincides with the same time that Public Works is open. But I'm going to try to squeeze in a meeting in the evening and kind of ask around and make sure that these rumors are well, yeah, the information as they are. So that's all I have to say, but I just hope to kind of put that in your mind and just kind of think about it, see what comes up on the Parks meeting. Because I've looked at both structures and it would be a shame to lose them, and I think they're great assets to the community, as I said before. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Casey. Anyone else here for public comment? If not, is there a motion to close the meeting?
So moved.
Seconded to adjourn city council for September 1st, 2019. September 3rd, excuse me. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.